Hello. Good afternoon. Let me see. So I think that I'm going to do a 3 or 4 part series. I got extraordinarily moved yesterday when I did an article about Bonnie Blue, the woman who broke the record for the number of sexual interactions in a 12-hour period. I think it was 1,020 something. And I mean, that's quite the feat, just logistically, but but it was interesting. The response was, I often put it was somewhat provocative things, and then I look at the response, really to see the underlying prevailing notions that people have, especially around women and especially around sex. So I start with a few principles and an undeviating premise. And everyone has probably heard me say at some point the Michael Pollan idea about mushroom hunting and how he went mushroom hunting with this guy, and the guy was looking out like, of course you see the mushrooms, and he couldn't see the mushrooms. Of course you see the mushrooms, he couldn't see the mushrooms. Of course you see the mushrooms. So then he got where the guy was, and they started looking at the same thing. And once they started looking at the same thing, lo and behold, not only did he see mushrooms, but there was a sea of mushrooms. There were mushrooms everywhere. He couldn't not see the mushrooms. And then from that point on, he saw the mushrooms every single time. And so there's a few things that I've seen. And it just so happens that most of the culture, as far as I can tell from my Instagram, no, this actually isn't true. Not all of the culture has seen what I've seen. In the same way that so when I was 20, I don't know, I'm 57 now. So however many years ago that was 37 years ago, and then you can figure out the date. I saw, one sees unalterably and incontrovertibly, if they do enough psychedelics, the profound effect that psychedelics have. And no matter what anybody says to you at that point, you've seen it, you know it. You know the healing, you know the self-realization, and you know the self-authority and the self-definition and the self-determination that experience gives you. And at the same time, I've had similar experiences, primarily in Zen and then later in Tibetan Buddhism for 30 years now, and then yoga, and as well as, as a big roller skater and as an artist. So what I do is I seek out the access points to a certain state of consciousness. And then because that consciousness proves to be what is considered, as I often say, the holy grail of consciousness. So that to me is, and scientifically, I should add, scientifically and culturally and historically and philosophically, is the route to end suffering for humanity. And that's, my life's work is to see how to do that. So the access point that we haven't figured out how to open is sexuality. I worked with people. I've worked with lobbyists who had worked in psychedelics, and they said they can't believe that they opened the psychedelics door before they opened the sexuality door. And I said, I do. I believe it. I know what we're up against in terms of people turning their mind from seeing something as dark and evil, damaging, threatening, harmful, only based in violation or harm, to transitioning that into something positive. So what I realized this is going to sound maybe charged, but so I was answering the responses, and I spent a good 6 or 7 hours responding, and I try to respond with great care, and I try to lead with educating rather than my sword, and I listen. I listen very closely, and in some ways, I was very happy to see how far things had progressed in terms of people being willing to hear about a woman. This is so anathema to our culture. People being willing to hear about a woman having such, and now I'm going to use my language. Now this is the language of somebody who's seen the mushrooms, okay? In many ways. A woman who has such self-authority, such body autonomy, such self-determination, that she answered a very, very intense call for a type of pilgrimage that is unimaginable. There are these, and I likened it to this, although some of the people weren't thrilled that I did. But when you go to, there are pilgrimages in Nepal or Mongolia, and you do 100,000 prostrations. Now I want to think about it. How crazy does that sound? You're going in the snow, in the rain, in the heat, and you're on the ground doing these prostrations. You can look it up on YouTube. It's fascinating. And so the reason that I use that example is that it is a type of prayer that you aren't necessarily reverent inside of at the time. You keep working out the form in such a way that you bypass, you go beyond what we'll talk about the science, the valence. And this is what all of these practices do. Psychedelics breaks through the valence of good and bad so you can go to the other side and write your own experience. That is the magical power of all powers. It's why psychedelics are big. It's why yoga is big. It's why meditation is big. They train you how to cross through that valence, we sometimes call it the ego, and go to the other side. And then you look back at all of your life's experiences and you get to write your own narrative. And you're trained how to write a healing narrative on the other side, rather than this happened to me and I am subject to the pain and suffering and habits that evolved as a result of this for the rest of my life, and I'm condemned. Rather than seeing yourself as condemned from life experience, you suddenly are given this superpower, I think, to determine your own interpretation for your experience in such a way that it will benefit you and grow you in the future. So one of the profound things that you'll see when we talk about the science is Dr. Andrew Newberg talks about the fact that only in Om, now this is going to be funny, and in veganism, I don't know why, in the literature, is the brain permanently changed in such a way that it seeks out positive experience and turns away from negative experience. Now that can even be inside of one's experience, meaning seeks out one's positive interpretation of something and turns away from a negative interpretation from something. Now what does that mean? They've just done all of this research recently on being lucky, which is so interesting. You know what being lucky boils down to?
Thinking you're lucky.
That's it. Considering yourself a lucky person. That's what, because what happens is if you consider yourself a lucky person, you start to look for opportunities and you see them because of the confirmation bias. Oh, I think I'm lucky. And so you start seeing them and living into them. And that ended up being the one distinction. Not race, class, ethnicity, none of those things. The perception that you're lucky. So this brain that can interpret things, if it's naturally veering toward a positive interpretation, what happens is something positive happens and you can increase it. Something negative happens and you see it as an obstacle to growth that you can use for your benefit, which is a fundamental aspect of what we'll talk about, the mystical state or flow. The magic of flow is that until then, you are at the mercy of your experience. Something happens, someone passes, you lose your job, you get sick, you're at the mercy of it. But once you learn how to master what's called the flow state, then what happens is you have control over your interpretation because obstacles enter, and we'll talk about this, to give you what's called enjoyment rather than mere pleasure, which is hedonic pleasure versus eudaimonic pleasure. We'll go into it. So I'm going to start. That's just my oversight, because my aim, this is what, oh yeah, I was going to say, this is what I was doing on Facebook and Instagram, as I was responding to people who were telling me I shouldn't be giving these young ladies any affirmations. But see, in my mind, and this is what I've seen, and this is what I wish for everyone to see, and that is, I start with an unwavering premise that sex is holy, that the sexual energies are holy, and that those energies bestow meaning. Meaning is not bestowed on them. So what I mean by that is all of these people are saying, you have to do all of these things for it to be sacred, for it to be special. No, it is special, and it makes the world special, especially when it's driven well with consciousness and attention. So when we talk about Om, the reason that I'm going to mention this one part, you're jacking into the biological drive. So you're jacking into 2 times. You have hyper consciousness. So one is life or death situations. The other is sexual energies. So you're accelerating your potential to have increased attention, okay, with sexual energies in such a way that you learn how to use them for benefit, we'll say. You aren't being used by them, which is how we think of conventional sex, right? All of a sudden you get this drive. Oh, you either, it tends to be, this isn't always, you don't have to write to me, and yes, I know there are non-binary people, but it tends to be that if you were born into a pink blanket, you feel arousal and you lock it down, and then if you're born in a blue blanket, then you just get that drive and you go. Those are the 2 responses we're trained in. And so what would happen if you weren't at the mercy of those drives where you had to shut it down, ignore it, or consume? If you could use that power to transform and either, in my mind, heal or self-realize. And I always say there's 4 ways you can use it: healing, relationship, liberation, and justice. And those are in my mind, the 4 silos of life. What we have to do if we want to transform ourselves in this world is those things. And so the first piece is I believe that these energies are holy. I don't just believe it, I know it. I know it incontrovertibly. There's nothing you could stick a knife to me. I would never change my opinion about this ever. In the same way, once you touch something in psychedelics and you know that there is another reality outside of this Truman Show ego, then you know there's something more. And once you know that, your entire life is transformed, which is why psychedelics are so effective, not just for ending PTSD, but for increasing compassion in the world. You see the interconnectedness of all things. So the first is these energies are holy, and so I say that because there's all of these ideas about divine feminine and divine sacred sexuality, and there's all these, and really all I can say is they're what's called the near friend or near enemy in Buddhism. And so what the near enemy is, so the far enemy is hate. If you have love, the far enemy is hate, right? The near enemy, the thing that looks like it's love but isn't, right, can be, or compassion, we'll say. Compassion, the far enemy of compassion is indifference. The near enemy is pity. So there can be people who feel pity for people and they think that they're feeling compassion, but that isn't compassion. Does that make sense? So the near enemy to actually touching how genuinely sacred and holy and profound sexual energies are is this kind of, we have to protect it and protect the women, and it's simply not true. What you're saying is we have to protect the most powerful force on the planet. It makes no sense. But you have to get out of the misogynistic view, and we'll talk historically why this idea of feeble and fragile women, and the fact that we continue to reinforce that, and then we ensure that it's true by entraining in women that they avoid the sexuality that would give them the power and vitality to carry out their vision in the world, why that's a profoundly misogynistic idea. And so what happens is we're given these scripts that sound so empowering. You know, bring the man down sounds so empowering. But if you recognize that you're actually nobility, it looks ridiculous. So the work, Joseph Campbell has said, and I agree, is when asked why he did the hero's journey and not the heroine's journey, and he said, because women are the destination. They're already there. They just need to realize it. That is the work. So all of these things about getting women there and protecting the ladies, and that it just isn't true. It's where the real work for a woman has to do with simply realizing, and so the reason why I am so profoundly adamant. And you know, my life is on the line. That's how profound. Like, I really put my money where my mouth is. Well, I put my lack of money where my mouth is. I put everything, because I'll die on this hill. Liz Gilbert talks about the fact that we have what's called the profane masculine and the profane feminine, and how they interlock. I don't think I have this one. So the profane masculine will, if it can't control the feminine, it will continue to attack. The profane feminine will continue to accommodate. She will get nicer and sweeter and more compassionate and more giving, and he will get more punitive and violent. Now, start there. Okay, you ready? Great. So then you have if you look at it culturally, the Audre Lorde has said this, but it's true historically. Audre Lorde has said that Eros, or sexuality, is spirituality on a feminine plane. Historically, in every single religion, every single tradition, what lies behind that was women who held sexuality as their sacred practice. So sexuality has always been the feminine practice behind the scenes, and the masculine practice has always been the religion side of things. Usually religion comes in, and what happens? The profane masculine punishes the feminine, and she gets kinder and goes into invisibility. So I am of the firm belief that we cannot realize as a culture, as a people, as this person, as these people, until women take back our birthright of sexuality. Once we do, then it can be employed in the right way. Because right now it is being employed in the most corrupt, violent, and as its shadow, as the opposite of what it's here to do. It just needs to be returned to its proper keepers. So I'm going to start with this. It's going to be a Nicole talk. So as I often say, There are two systems of operation: the typical masculine system of operation, which is rational and logical, and then there's the feminine, equal counterpart system of operation that is non-rational, but just as effective and important. So I'm going to start with this Buddhist story, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Buddhist story: once upon a time, Yama, the Lord of Death, went on an uncontrolled rampage. To prevent Yama from devouring the entire cosmos, the Bodhisattva of wisdom devised a clever stratagem. He turned himself into a great mirror and beckoned Yama, this is the Lord of Death, by the way, that's your ego, that's what they're talking about, beckoned Yama to look at him. What Yama saw was Vajrabhairava, simultaneously his own mirror image and the figure of the conqueror. Buddhist wisdom thus defeated death by revealing to him his true nature as impermanence embodied. In turn, we confront this stunning enemy. Okay, so the idea, though, is that if you actually want to address corruption, if you actually want to address what's wrong, you look at what something does, and then you give it the mirror image back. So this is why I am calling this talk. What am I calling it? Wait, I have it, just a minute. I am calling it, see, it's so charged. My best advisor inside is saying, don't, Nicole, you're gonna get in trouble. It says that often. Deprogramming the anti-sex cult built by misogyny. And because that's what I saw yesterday when I was listening to these, looking at these comments, is it's a cult. And the cult is built really as a very, very effective and subtle way of keeping women from our power, and really keeping, in that same way that religion likes to control things, keeping things under control in a way that we can't actually have a profound experience. So with that being said, is Terence McKenna talking about psychedelics, and he said, psychedelics, and this speaks to my understanding of what happens with sexual energies. Psychedelics are illegal not because a loving government is concerned that you may jump out of a third-story window. You can just trade in sexuality there. Psychedelics are illegal because they dissolve opinion structures and culturally lay down models of behavior and information processing. They open you up to the possibility that everything you know is wrong. And that's really where the journey begins, is having that crack. He says this other great quote that I like. I don't know, it's a little long, but we have to create a culture. Don't watch TV, don't read magazines, don't even listen to NPR. Create your own roadshow. The nexus of space and time where you are now is the most immediate sector of your universe. And if you're worrying about, and I'll put different names in here for fun, P. Diddy, or Donald Trump, it was Michael Jackson and Bill Clinton, or someone else, then you are disempowered. You are giving it all away to icons which are maintained by an electronic media, so that you have to dress like X or have lips like Y. This is shit-brained, this kind of thinking. So the basic idea is that these various practices, yoga, meditation, psychedelics, give you access to something that make you ungovernable in a certain way. But I would argue that they make you profoundly obedient to a much deeper governance, what's called the Dharma, a human governance that is far kinder, far more pure, far less corrupt than the actual governance that we have now. So, as I was watching the comments, what I saw was just a complete and utter misunderstanding of how things actually are. And what I saw is this idea that spirituality is somehow superior to sexuality. In the same way, and mind you, the same idea is that men are somehow superior to women. No, spirituality is the outgrowth of sexuality. This is why we started working with Dr. Andrew Newberg. He's considered the third top neuroscientist in the world. And this is from his book. Where do all these rituals come from? The simple, by the way, he had done most of his research on people's experience in spirituality and their experience with God. And he was on Morgan Freeman's show, what was it? God. On National Geographic, and just talking about the brain states of when people have prayer or mystical experiences. And so he's talking about spirituality. Where do all these rituals of spirituality come from? The simple answer is sex. If you look at virtually every animal species, from insects to reptiles to mammals, and animal rituals are mating rituals. They have built into the psychology of virtually every animal on our planet in order to allow sex to occur. The body movements, vocalizations, visual displays, smells, and all sorts of rhythmic activity drive the autonomic nervous system to experience a profound sense of connection with another animal. By the way, that's what's considered the holy grail of consciousness in science today, is that sense of merging, what is called eunia mystica. When the nuns are praying, they have eunia mystica. That means being at one with God or the mystery. Okay, sex and mating rituals are what helped all these mechanisms get into our brains and body in the first place. From there, all other rituals come about. In the end, all rituals do one main thing. They connect us to the world and each other in powerful ways. And that, by the way, is what I'll argue when I say this, because Om and sexuality are being shown to be the premier way to make that connection. Psychedelics are a little dangerous, so are high-intensity sports. You can break a leg. Yoga and meditation, I love them. God knows I do them every day, but they're really, really slow. They're glacial. And so sex is relatively, none of these practices are entirely safe. If you watch the documentary Retreat, which is fantastic, somebody has a nervous breakdown in the middle of a meditation retreat. So anything that's actually worth its weight is going to be a little bit dangerous. So it's relatively safe, and it's much faster than yoga and meditation in terms of getting it. Our Drupal has said, I'm here because this is the most effective way to get to the place that we go to in Tibetan Buddhism. In the end, all rituals do they connect us. Oh, and so I've always said, and Matthew Fox has said, when we talk about climate change, the issue is, he says, if everybody could have the experience of the awe and grandeur of nature, then there would be no, climate disaster. What I would say is, yeah, you have to get people to the place where they can actually have that experience. We're so inured to our lives. We're so overwhelmed, tired and wired. We're in overload in terms of stimuli, that to actually feel the awe and grandeur of nature in a way that you can connect to it is virtually impossible. What these various practices do is make possible one's capacity to sense again, to begin to sense things simply as they are. And the beauty of these practices, this is one of the reasons why I've gone this route in my life, is that it's not an overlay. It's not like something, sorry, but this is going to be me. I love religion, I love Jesus, I love them all. But there's an overlay, right? There's a set of ideas that you have to take on in order to have the experience. When you have a profound mystical experience, you have it for yourself. It's a direct experience, what in Zen is called direct experience. And so you know for yourself, nobody has to tell you. Well, that has a much more profound capacity to change you and your connection to the environment, to the world, period. So it is that sense of connection which is fundamental to all rituals, and particularly religious and spiritual rituals. Remember, the basis of mating rituals is to connect two animals together to create the next generation. Isn't that so pretty? And what we talked with him about, it's not in this quote, is so then what happens if you decouple that from mere biology? That's what Om does. Om takes this biological imperative to connect two animals together to create the next generation, only decouples it from mere biology and has it be people come together to birth a creative energy. Then you can determine how you want to use it. In Buddhism, the big challenge is getting enough energy to live the ideals that you have. You have, I mean, stunning ideals in terms of how we can live as more compassionate people. But the carrying out, the actually leaving the zendo is very difficult. So how do you take that vitality and connect it to very profound ideals so that we're all, each of us, charged to make this difference in the world? So through various senses and rhythms, the brain is driven to lower our personal boundaries enough so that we might connect with something else. And that you know, what they discover is brings you into what a 30-year Tibetan Buddhist practitioner would call impermanence, which impermanence and interconnection. Those are the two things that you discover after 30 years of Buddhism, which is why Drupan's here, you discover in about 7 minutes of an Om. That state of, it's called synchrony, and that capacity to connect with anything that's around you is the synchrony. That is a profound state of existence that some people spend 30 years living in a cave to access. Now we hit the problem. And the problem is, but she's a whore, and she just had these guys pump and dump. And somebody actually wrote that up. I try to come back and be very like, no, that isn't how it was. But I did kind of laugh that they would use that expression. So one of this, there's another quote that I have, but the idea is when you hear people talking about women's sexuality, you're hearing more about the person who's saying it than the person that they're talking about. Women's sexuality is almost invariably and entirely projected onto rather than projecting out. And that's what I aim to change. So the issue is that when I looked at the unifying factor of comments in my section, invariably, it was people saying what her motives were, which were always sinister. What her motives were, how she felt. People were saying how she felt. They were telling me how she felt in the middle of this experience and after, you know, the implications of her. Clearly, she was coming from a position of very low self-esteem. All of these projections went on to her, but what I would say, I didn't see that in her video interview after. That wasn't what she was saying with those rosy cheeks and bright smile. I don't understand. And they said, but she cried. And I said, yeah, I cry after yoga and meditation. If I don't cry, it's not a good session. That means I haven't activated my involuntary musculature. That's the aim of any practice, is to activate your parasympathetic nervous system so that so that your ego can relax. And so if you think of your ego as like a merry-go-round of the same thoughts you've always had your entire life, just going around in slightly changing form, that's what an ego does. So that feeling, you know, that every now and then you're out in nature and Be silent for a second. Oh, I feel connected to things. Oh, wow, this is eternal. It's always been here. That's beautiful. Or you're moved by art or music, or Liz Gilbert talks about the experience of Olé, where there's two people dancing, and suddenly it's as if they're filled with light and they're transcendent. Okay, those moments are the moments where there's a crack in the ego. The aim, oh honey, the aim is to keep it permanently cracked open for the rest of your life, to live in that state of connection to the awe and grandeur of life. Now, here it's important that I give you the definition of pleasure and enjoyment, because this is where we get confused. This is where we get confused, especially around sexuality. I think the biggest misconception is that it's supposed to be pleasurable. It's not. That's not the aim. If it's just pleasurable, then it's hedonic. Well, you'll see. Pleasure and enjoyment are fundamentally different in how they shape our lives. Pleasure is the contentment we feel when basic biological needs or socially conditioned expectations are satisfied, like eating food, resting after exhaustion, or indulging in entertainment. These experiences restore balance and reduce discomfort. Okay, so you're tired, you take a nap, or you work too hard, you come home and have some wine, or you have been working on a paper for weeks and you take a bath. But if you take a bath for a week, you're going to have some diminishing returns. If you drink too much wine, you're going to have some diminishing returns. Pleasure always has diminishing returns. That's the important thing to understand. These experiences restore balance and reduce discomfort, but they do not create growth or add complexity to our lives. Enjoyment, by contrast, emerges when we invest psychic energies in activities that are challenging or not enjoyable. Things that we don't perceive as enjoyable. Things that we don't like, but that are aimed for our benefit, okay? And that require effort and push us beyond our current abilities. Those are what's necessary for this. Whether it's mastering a difficult skill, solving a complex problem, or engaging in stimulating conversation, it demands focus, determination, and the willingness to take on something new or uncertain. Unlike the passive satisfaction of pleasure, enjoyment rewards us with lasting sense of accomplishment and enriched sense of self. So Mihai Csikszentmihalyi looked at what had people be happy in a sustainable way for the rest of their lives. And that's the distinction that he found. Those who merely relied on hedonic pleasure, which is just like, it's chasing the buck, for example, or living into the script that's in our culture. You go to school, you do well. You go to college, you do well. You meet someone, you go on a date, you get married, you have a kid, you get a promotion in your job, you get a new car, you get a new house, the script, right? That's the default, and that can be had merely in pleasure, but you're always going to have diminishing returns over a period of time. The marriage goes sour, you don't enjoy your house, you wake up with midlife crisis, you're like, what happened? And you wake up with menopause, it's gone. So how do you create a life that has increasing and accelerated happiness and joy? It's through enjoyment. Now, each one of these things that I talk about requires enjoyment, difficulty. Like, you have to actually dislike it a lot. It's not mere pleasure. It's engagement. It's obstacles, facing obstacles. So each one of those, yoga, meditation, your knees are killing you, you're falling asleep, right? Yoga, you're forcing yourself to be stretched. psychedelics, we all know you have some bad trips in order to actually have the deeper experience. And so we have this idea, though, that sexuality is supposed to be pleasurable, and that has done more damage to sexuality. It has taken it out of its, remember I talked about the profane, out of its profound nature. The profound nature requires a practice in order to unlock the power that's located inside of it. So that's what I found, is that basically everyone only viewed sexuality for pleasure. And then everyone's so shocked when it goes into the diminishing returns of, violation, recreation, and procreation. When those things happen, they're so shocked, but you don't have any control when you're merely in pleasure. So then when we first started One Taste, somebody gave me this article, and this was very important. It ended up being incredibly prophetic. And I'm so fortunate that they gave me this article because it told me what happened and what could happen and how to prevent it. And as soon as I got this article, it's called Fear of Yoga. It was in the Utne Reader. As soon as I got it, they said that it was science that pulled yoga through. So the article begins by saying, yoga is now brand agnostic. I think at the time it was a $13 billion industry. Your grandmother can do it, your kids can do it. It's the yoga and meditation are the two top non-pharmaceutical prescriptions that doctors give at this point. It's universally accepted. People who don't do yoga feel like they should do yoga. I know Brian, who was one of the chief strategists of CrossFit, and he said everyone felt guilty that they didn't do yoga. There's this feeling that it is the highest practice that exists in terms of physical activity, right? Well, at the same time, a spiritual reform movement, so they're talking about, look at yoga. The angels come out for yoga. And they're talking about how it entered into the country. At the same time, a spiritual American reform called Me Too, was nearing the height of its success in a campaign to purify the nation's morals and legislation. You're going to like this one, Omar. You can read the tea leaves here. Fear of foreigners, fear of women having power, plus a purity panic, being defiled, brought to a boil by the sensational yellow press, set loose the idea that these dark-skinned foreigners and the morals loosening effects of their yogi philosophy were a menace to society. Groups of followers were from then on routinely described as cults. In the spring of 1908, newspaper readers from coast to coast read about the humiliation of Mr. Winthrop Ellsworth Stone, the president of Purdue University, whose wife fell under the yoga spell and left him and their children. She was kept from her family. The American media's war on yoga picked up momentum, fueled by growing white slave hysteria. They are stealing our daughters. And it's always these poor, innocent, fragile, weak women that are being stolen. In June 1910, the month Congress unanimously passed the Mann Act, known as White Slavery Act. The American yogi Pierre Bernard was jailed for abducting 2 young women in New York. A week of sensational press coverage in which he was forever branded the omnipotent the loving guru of the tantrics. I've been called that, but it was messianic. Anyway, here's one of the 50 headlines from that week from Mr. Randolph Hearst's New York American. Police break in on weird Hindu rites. Mind you, this is yoga, okay? Girls and men mystics cease strange dance as priest is arrested. I mean, it's just a yoga class, okay? I just want to show you how the real cult works. What it does is it calls it a cult. To the American consumer of news, yoga was no longer just a queer pastime. It was evil, a con, a cult, uncivilized, heathen, and anti-American. Even the word became a metonym for secret doorways and sex worship. Yogis were nothing more than swindlers and seducers. So I think that's when I was looking at how do we begin to deprogram the anti-sex cult that exists in the world, and why does it exist? You know, I think Terence McKenna really nails it when he says, oh, it exists because these things get you free. They get you free, they give you autonomy, they give you a mind of your own, a power of your own, a practice of your own, and that's threatening. And then more importantly, and this is what I think is being ushered into the world, and this is what I, you know, really, I've already considered. One of the things that I liked that, what's his name? Eric Weinstein said is, you know, as soon as you say something that goes against the prevailing narrative, the first thing they do, you know, is they give you a scarlet, we'll just say, he had a different one, but I'll say K for kook, you know, and all of a sudden you know, he's a pretty profound physicist, but he's just called a kook because he's saying something against the narrative. And then once that happens, that's almost impossible to get out of. And so when I talk to people, I was just talking to somebody upstairs and about, you know, what was one taste here to do? And, you know, the basic answer is get out of suffering, cause of suffering, help others get out of suffering. But the truth is, first to transition the world, how about to transition the world from one era to another? And, you know, that's why I always point to other people, because I sound like a kook when I say it, like, and Thomas L. Friedman said that we're, and so did John Hagel, who wrote The Power of Pull. You know, it's a different time in the universe, especially with decentralized internet, et cetera. We're in a different world, and we're going from a sort of fixed way of operating into what they call a world of flow. And so the ultimate consciousness in this time will be those who can function in flow states and those who can't, those who hold on to the archaic ways and those who move into this new way of being. And so that's why I think psychedelics are entering these various practices. So I do believe, you know, it's funny because I do believe that sex is the most profound way you can heal trauma. We'll talk about the science, but you know, it is because with arousal, that's the only time you can break through that valence of good or bad, period. And so, there actually is no better way, is what I believe. But that already sounds kooky enough to these people who are saying that poor, sick, low self-esteem, traumatized woman did this thing, right? Like, so if I say to them, well, actually, she was probably in a profound healing state, I'm already over the edge with them. But this morning, you know, I think about this talk, and I always go through this. I always negotiate, like, oh, please don't make me say that. No, turn that down. And then I'm always bargaining and negotiating. And finally, I was just like, are you not in enough trouble in your life that you just will say the thing you think? And so the thing that I think is really to usher in the feminine. What is the feminine? It is creative consciousness. What is creative consciousness? It is this, what Stephen Kotler calls, it's the superpower. And then this, I love this quote from Stephen Kotler's book from a neuroscientist. His name isn't in here, but you can find it. It's in Kotler's book. More importantly, though, flow alters who you are. Oh, here it is. Thank you. Kotler quotes Harvard Medical School psychologist New Hallowell. Flow naturally transforms a weakling into a muscle man, a sketcher into an artist, a dancer into a ballerina, a plodder into a sprinter, an ordinary person into someone extraordinary. Everything you do better in flow. From baking a chocolate cake, to planning a vacation, to solving a differential equation, to writing a business plan, to playing tennis and making love. Flow is the doorway to the more most of us seek. I love that. That feeling of searching or reaching or craving or yearning is gratified in that state of flow. Rather than telling ourselves to get used to it, that's all there is. Instead, learn to enter flow. There you will find, in manageable doses, all the more you need. So that's where I thought I'd start. And then, I want to go into a little bit more about what I'll go into tomorrow is more of the science and how it fits in, because what I find is here's what I think. I was just talking. I'm going to say something else controversial here, but I did say to that voice that was telling me what to talk about today. Okay, I'm just going to do it. I'm not going to turn the volume down. But I was just saying what we discovered. Love Trump, hate Trump, do whatever you do about Trump. It's none of my business. But when Trump said, "Grab her by the pussy," right? Everyone went crazy. This is the end of him. It's over. And he just said, "You guys are all crazy. I'm just going to keep going." And he just kept going. And what we discovered was all these things we think we're so freaked about, we actually aren't. So there's this idea that we're freaked about these things, but I don't think we actually are. What I discovered, 30 years into this, is that there's this idea that you have to convince somebody about these ideas. I think it's more, you have to remove the obstructions to what everyone already knows. When I was at the height of teaching, we've been called a subway of all different types of people who came on that train. It was not, it wasn't just young yogi girls, and it wasn't older, scientists. It wasn't people of color. It wasn't lesbians. They were all on this train together. And so what unified them? They were the ones just who were closer to admitting what they already knew. This is the most profound power in human biology, and if you employ it skillfully by training the attention, then you have some real power. And most of the people who wake up to this, in a sense, are people who actually want to make change in the world. So one of the things Stephen taught at our place, and we were in the elevator, and it takes people a long time to know what we're doing, long time, and people think that climax is part of this. Climax has nothing to do with OM, zero, nothing. I mean, if it happens, it's an accident. If it happens, you're doing it wrong. No, joking. It's just not part of it. In fact, climax is boring. Once you really get into the practice, once you are, plugged into that place, the last thing you want to do is climax, because it'll disrupt your experience. There is no rule against it. It's just not beneficial, enjoyable for the deeper practice. So anyway, it takes people a long time to get it, because usually that's what people think. They think you're just masturbating someone in order to get a climax. I don't know why people would do that, but I don't understand. That's not where I live, but that's what people thought we were doing. So when somebody actually really gets what we're doing, you're going to the most profound state in human existence. Okay, I get it. And Stephen Kotler got it immediately. It's very rare. And so we were on this elevator and he said, wait a minute, this isn't even a sexual practice. This is about attention training. It's like, yeah, that's what we're doing. Oh, you're just jacking into the biology to crank up the attention training so it accelerates. Yeah, that's what we're doing. Nothing to do with sex, which doesn't mean that you can't apply the attention to sex. You can, but you can also apply it to cooking. You can also apply it to public speaking. I apply it to changing prisons into monasteries, or we apply it to free food. We apply it to organic erotic. They all operate by the exact same principles that operate when you have attention training. Does that make sense? That to me, I can't think of anything more holy. So then you go into, how did it come to be viewed as so sinister, so ugly, and even in the Torah or in the Bible, it's viewed as something beautiful, especially when you get into the deeper, Pope John the 10th wrote Theology of the Body, one of the most beautiful books about Eros ever written. When I went to Union for a semester, Union Theological, the first book they gave me was Eros in the Bible. So we know that there's a place where it's viewed as sacred and beautiful, and yet when we hear about it or think about it, there's a disgust. It's kind of repugnant. Or a deep-seated shame. And so how did that happen? Well, I would say that we women abandoned our posts. There's the book, When God Was a Woman, that I refer to often, talks about, at that time, there were the priests of religion, and there were the kadosh, the holy women of the fertility cults. And although, of course, even then it was, Christians made it capital R religion and small c cult, bad people. And at that time, so men did these sort of ritualistic practices, and women did the actual rituals. And so, in our history, we held sexuality and all of the practices around it for purposes of healing. And the highest people in that culture were the women who held the sexuality. The same is true at the Temple of Venus. I tell the story when I went there, and it said the day that Christ was born, the temple was destroyed. But you can actually sit on the table, sit in the area where there's a table there, where these rituals were carried out. And these women were there taking in all of the smog of war, transforming it in the world. And that's fundamentally what we lack. So when people say, oh, what are you doing? It's like, oh, well, we basically live, if we live in a world where women are not owning sexuality, it's like living in a world without trees. Because we have nothing to take in the smog and transform it back into oxygen. Well, so when you look at the greed, hatred, and delusion in our culture, in our world, and you look at how smoggy people's thoughts and minds are, that's why. That's why. And then, there's a reason that I'm so fierce about the fact that it has to be done through an enjoyment practice, not through pleasure. Because if it's just done with pleasure, you'll never cultivate it. That's like the difference between maybe. It's either corn syrup, which kills you, corn, which is nice, and maize, which is sacred, right? And so that's what I'm talking about, is that class of experience for people. So you look at that, and then you look at, well, what happened? Well, what happened, I can tell you what happened in the West, is that Protestantism entered. Women were, at that time, they were still seeing, Havelock Ellis, I probably have one of his quotes here, talks about the fact that women were seen as far more sexual than men. And a woman could ask for a divorce if her man wasn't being sexual enough. Women were thought as the holders and keepers of all sexual expression, far superior in sexual nature to men. And in a sense, that's how they had energetic equals. Is women had this power, men had this power. But then what happened was women were given a social contract. And the church basically said, hey, we don't like having you as heathen seductresses. What if we will give you a social position as equal, or not even equal? We're going to make it a really good deal for you. We're going to make you superior to men. In fact, you're going to be angelic. You're going to be angel-like, chaste virgin angels who are superior to men, just if you cut off your sex. If you cut off your power source, we'll give you this superior position in culture. And women said yes. And that was where it started to turn. Now, the problem is the people who made the deal didn't deliver on their promise. So now we had cut off our sex, and we didn't have equality, but we were in a position that if we had sex, we were so high up here, we now became fallen women. And that's the place where you begin to see the break that you see in women of virgin and whore. She's either a virgin or a whore. She's either this or she's that. She's good or she's evil, right? I just read a great article that said there's either consent or violation. That's what's happened in our culture. There's this dichotomy, and women fall on one side or the other. We're either the same as we're either victim or we're villain. That's all of these splits. And I can tell you that on this side is the sexual woman, because she's fallen, and on this side is the asexual woman. But if you wanted to keep, if you were a cult leader, if you were a misogynistic cult leader, and you wanted to keep control over your more powerful and a little bit unruly class, then what you would do is you would exalt the group that had determined to relinquish their power source, and you would denigrate the group of women who had determined to stay in contact with their power source. And then you would determine, okay, there would be a sort of middle class. That middle class would be those who agreed to only have controlled expression in certain ritualistic experiences of their native power, so that they could always be controlled by other members of your cult. And they would never get out of hand or unruly. Because if actually at any moment each woman woke up to Joseph Campbell's vision that women are already there, we're already there. We are the destination. We hold the power. We just need to realize it. You have to think about everything that would change in our culture. Our entire homeostatic society, society is really homeostatic. If you have too many disruptions, a lot of things could go wrong. But this would upend everything. Think about Big Pharma alone. how much of it is based on women's neuroses? Because we've, the famous book, Feminine Mystique, is all about this fundamental neurotic quality in women, this deep sense of ennui and meaninglessness and restlessness, but women are trained to think something's wrong with them. We're not trained to be like, something is wrong with this culture. We're trained to keep going like this. And so what do? We become the self-help industry. That gets upended. Oh my goodness. All kinds of economics get upended. Everything goes upside down if women begin to wake up to this idea that fundamentally we're already it. So if you wanted to have an anti-sex cult, the first thing you would do is have women have it be that it is exalted to reject the power source that would wake you up.